Aynı kaldıralım.
Can you go back behind the line? I need you back a little bit, Maria. Thank you.
Thanks everybody for coming here today. I just want to make clear at the outset that according to the rules of the authorization of this action, which is about defenders around the world, we cannot name any countries. So no climate justice without human rights. That's been a rallying cry for human rights defenders for the past couple of years. But what's behind that? It's not just a catchy slogan, but it's something that's embedded in everything we do. So Article 6 of the UNFCCC obliges the states that sign that convention to promote and facilitate public access to information on climate change and its effects, and public participation in addressing climate change and its effects, and in coming to adequate solutions. And it's the same in the Paris Agreement. But yet over the last year, the rights to free expression, to free association and to peaceful association have been further undermined the world over, including in the global north. People calling for political reforms are criminalized, arbitrarily detained, or worse. In some cases, governments are doing the detaining, in other cases they fail to protect people's rights and they stand by as corporate actors stifle dissent. And this includes countries that have hosted or will host UNFCCC COPs. And this is something the UNFCCC should take into account when it's deciding on future COPs. In my country, last year there was new repressive legislation that further eroded freedom of speech and of peaceful protest. The Public Order Act criminalises various forms of protest, such as locking on, and expanded police stop and search powers. It created protest banning orders and gave the authorities the right to seek civil injunctions against peaceful protest. And then further, after that, the regulations that were put in place in relation to this law expanded the circumstances in which people can impose conditions on protests backed by prison sentences. And also last year, the police in my country were also found to be institutionally racist, which is something that minoritized communities in my country have known for a long time. And in the arrests and prosecutions of peaceful environmental protesters throughout 2023, in some cases, protesters were prevented from referencing climate change or other environmental concerns in their defence. And if they ignored those orders, they faced prosecution for contempt of court and prison sentences. So that's why we say, protect the defenders, free them all. Free them all! Free them all!
No climate justice
Without human rights! No climate justice without human rights! No climate justice without human rights!
This is the story of my home country. Of my country, human rights defenders and climate activists who are demanding our government does at home what it demands internationally. They are facing increasing restrictions on their right to peacefully protest, and even more worryingly, are being stigmatized. We are seeing more and more protests banned or restricted, whether of those wanting to raise their voices about the need for urgent climate action or those who are demanding a stop to international crimes and war crimes that they see every night on their television screens. And those who do protest peacefully face the prospect of pain grips by police. These methods are intended to cause pain by overbending arms, applying pressure on certain ways, and are increasingly used by police as a means of dispersing climate activists who are blocking the streets. The use of intentional pain by police officers sounds a lot like the definition of torture or ill-treatment. And in my country, you can even be put in jail before a protest under preemptive detention laws. Last year, ahead of an international car fair, at least 27 climate activists were placed in preventative detention for up to 30 days under a law that allows the police in that state to request detention without concrete suspicion of a crime or initiating criminal proceeding. Stigmatization of these people is increasing, both from the political sphere and in the media. And we know that when this kind of stigmatization happens, it leads to physical attacks and to torrents of online hate and threats. And stigmatization gives license for criminalization. Activists that carried out peaceful civil disobedience actions have been investigated in 2 states by the Public Prosecutor's Office, which are accusing them of forming a criminal organization. These investigations have involved extensive surveillance measures, including the interception of press telephone and the confiscation of personal data from support groups, creating a chilling effect on peaceful protests. My country must address the root causes instead of criminalize human rights and climate activists. Protect environment defenders, free them all!
Free them all!
No climate justice without human rights! No climate justice without human rights! No climate justice without human rights!
No climate justice without human rights!
My name is Jacob Johns. My country often acts as obstructionists in these international spaces, and my country persecutes environmental activists back at home in the same classification as domestic terrorism. Environmental activists in my country are persecuted, are targeted, and more importantly, focused on by fascist occupation and by fascists who come and stand in opposition to progressive environmental policy. I was recently shot in the chest with a hollow point bullet at a prayer gathering by natives in my country, by far-right agitators. This bullet was a hollow point bullet that destroyed my internal organs, destroyed my spleen, damaged my liver, damaged my pancreas, and cut a hole through my stomach. I was able to survive and come back to life to continue to do this work. So often, indigenous people globally are targeted by fascist occupiers, by colonialism, by capitalism, and we are here to say that despite the accusations from governmental forces persecuting us in a negative way, that we are here, we will survive, and our voices are unified as we fight for human rights. No climate justice
without human rights! No climate justice without human rights!
Saleh Abdel Fattah, a writer and human rights defender that has been arrested under every head of state of his country of birth that was in power during his lifetime. He is currently in detention following an unfair trial on spurious charges that relate to his human rights advocacy, basically for a Facebook post. For years, he has been deprived from seeing his son, tortured and subjected to inhumane detention conditions, not allowed any reading material, paper or pen, with absolutely no contact to the outside world other than 20 minutes a month visit from a single family member from behind the plexiglass. On April 2nd, 2022, Ale embarked a hunger strike that escalated to a full hunger and water strike 2 years ago at COP. Ale nearly died before stopping his hunger strike on 15th of November 2022. His family said in March 2023, the pledges made during COP 2 years ago by the world leaders are, I think, what kept Ale from returning to the hunger strike after he nearly died. But more than 2 years have gone and nothing has happened and he remains in prison. I'm going to read now an excerpt of a letter that he sent on Saturday, 17th of September of 2022. How are you, Mama? Tell me about your health. My last letter to you, the one you never got, was mainly thinking out loud about global warming because of the news. I was just trying out an idea I have about the roles that demography and election cycles play in the major industrial and consumer societies in tipping the balance away from taking serious measures. The idea was that aging societies, societies that rely on migrants to renew their lifeblood, societies where political rights don't extend to all taxpayers, and societies that drift farther and farther away from the extended families. These societies are not invested in the future and the prosperity of generations that haven't yet been born, are not invested enough to sacrifice present privileges in favor of the remote future. And they don't reward or punish politicians for the results of their decisions after they retire from office. So the first idea in this letter was the global West and North will not do anything that involves a sacrifice of prosperity, of competitive advantage, nor will they gamble with their political and institutional stability. This isn't just because of the greed of big capitalists, but because of the composition of their societies. Decision makers know this. They accept this and they reproduce this. The only actions they can take are actions that are potentially profitable. They dream of the green economy or that tap into the technical solutions that don't require social change. There can be no climate justice without human rights. Free them all!
Free them all!
No climate justice
without human rights! No climate justice without human rights!
This is my story and my family's story. My father, Dr. Gubay Badoglu, he's an oil and gas industry critic. Last year, he and my mom was in the same car and their car were crashed. They were physically dragged from inside. We couldn't have any news from them for hours. Me and my two brothers were crying on the phone. We were screaming because we couldn't have any news from our parents. Later on, they released my mom and she had all over her body bruises. She had knots on her head. And the idea was born in my country because my dad's imprisonment started a chilling effect. If the professor of London School of Economics is detained in this fashion, then anything can happen to anybody in my country. And what do you think that has done that led this to this? He has been investigating oil and gas environmental effects, revenues, corruption, embezzlement, and has been leading campaigns against oil and gas industries, trying to do his best for his country. But not only that, they also deprived him in prison from drinkable water, medication, access to hospital and medical care. He couldn't have proper food. And after international support and our family members' effort, we were able to get him to release to house arrest this year. However, now he has major heart issues and he needs urgent surgery that is not possible in my country. And if he doesn't get this surgery, he can die anytime. But he's not alone. In my country, there's more than 300 political prisoners. Since my dad's arrest, it has been tripled and reached more than 300. Abdas media journalist, editor-in-chief Sevinç Vakıfkızı, and other journalists from the same media was detained because they have been investigating corruption and embezzlement. Toplum TV, its journalist and the founder Alasker Mehmetli is detained and he has no access to medical care. He cannot even get medical tests whether to know he has a cancer or not. Founder Anar Mehmetli has been investigating the elections for decades, also founded the Climate of Justice Center, has also been detained and kidnapped on the road. They're all in detention as other political prisoners. There's no access to medical care, there's no access to food, proper food and drinking water, and they need your help, they need international support. Free them all, and no climate justice without human rights.
Free them all! No climate justice without human rights! No climate justice without human rights!
This is a story about Dr. Khalid Al-Sir. Dr. Khalid Al-Sir is a surgeon whose fate is currently unknown. A dedicated and talented young surgeon, Dr. Khalid Al-Sir, was one of the health workers who decided to remain at Nasser's hospital to treat his patients, even while it was being encircled by the occupying forces. He has been held by those forces in conditions that amount to enforced disappearance since 24th of March 2024. What has this to do with the climate justice? We all know that war does not only cause death, destruction, and immense suffering for civilians, but also contributes massively to climate emissions. There is no climate justice without human rights. Dr. Khalid Al-Sir, according to his colleagues, he was detained in his hospital, Nasser Hospital, during a raid on his premises by occupying forces that fully encirculated the hospital. According to international human rights organization, they believe that Dr. Khalid Al-Sir was acting in accordance with his duties as a medical professional and should have been respected and protected as such. A released detainee who was held along with Dr. Khalid Al-Sir reported to the media that he witnesses the torture of Dr. Khalid Al-Sir that included blocking his bread with glare. The detention while on duty and enforced disappearance of health workers is a part of the and parcel of the ongoing healthcare system and infrastructure where Dr. Khalid Al-Sir worked. Healthcare workers continue to endure increasingly horrific and inhumane conditions while caring for their patients during a military operation and blocking of adequate medical supplies and fuel. According to World Health Organization, at least 214 health workers have been detained while on duty by occupying forces during the war since October 2023. According to local health ministry, at least 106 health workers are either detained or missing. Dr. Khalid Al-Sir must be released. Until this happens, at the very least, his family and families of all other health workers who have been forcibly displaced in custody of occupying forces must be told their fate. Without a legal status, all those are arbitrarily detained must be released immediately. There is no climate justice without human rights.
No climate justice without human rights! No climate justice without human rights!
This is the story of indigenous rights defenders who campaign on issues related to land rights, environmental rights, systemic violations against Dalit and Adivasi communities who have been targeted with legal action, including arbitrary detention. Human rights defenders and community leaders in the country of my birth with the anti-Jindal movement have been facing severe repression, including arrests, fabricated charges, threats, and harassment. The anti-Jindal movement is a community-led peaceful protest movement by the villagers against illegal handover of land in several villages in their state to a private steel company that wants to build a massive plant on their lands. The villagers will not only lose their lands and livelihoods, but we know that the steel industry worldwide is a major emitter of carbon dioxide. Community leaders and human rights defenders have been repeatedly targeted for campaigning peacefully against the steel company, as well as against the police violence. Since December 2021, there has been a heavy armed police presence in the affected villages. What does a heavy police presence really mean? It means 24 police platoons, which is approximately 700 police personnel in these villages. Police have been deployed at entry points and restricted freedom of movement and access to and exit from the area, including agricultural fields and betel vineyards. They have also restricted supplies going into the village, including by rationing food. Arrests and targeting also increased following police violence on 14th January 2022, forcing human rights defenders and community leaders into hiding. In January 2022, Devendra Swain, leader of the peaceful protests, was arrested along with other human rights defenders following a peaceful march against illegal blockade of one of the villages by police and the demolition of their betel vineyard cultivation. There are credible reports of torture in custody against all persons arrested on 14th January. And just 1 month ago, in May 2024, Devendra Swain and 3 others, Manas Bardhan, Abhay Malik, Kailash Das, were convicted in a false case filed against them. Devendra Swain was sentenced to 2 years in prison and the others to 6 months. Free Devendra Swain, free them all!
Free them all! No climate justice without human rights! No climate justice without human rights!
This is the story of Ahmed Mansour, an engineer, poet, and father of 4. He is also one of the most celebrated human rights activists in his country and the recipient of the Martin Ennals Award. Prior to his arrest over 7 years ago, Mansour had dedicated over a decade of his life to advocating for human rights in his country and the wider region. Multiple earlier government attempts to silence him did not stop him. Authorities detained Mansour and 4 others for 6 months in 2011 and placed him on a travel ban since. Mansour was one of the first human rights defenders who was targeted with the notorious Pegasus spyware, as revealed in 2016. Since detaining him again in March 2017, Mansour has been held largely incommunicado, isolated from other prisoners and denied a bed. After a grossly unfair trial in 2018, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Human rights experts on May 7, 2019, regarding Mansour's detention conditions, stated, "According to reports at our disposal, throughout his deprivation of liberty, Mr. Mansour has been kept in solitary confinement and in conditions of detention that violate basic international human rights standards and which risk taking on an irrevocable toll on Mr. Mansour's health." In December 2023, during COP28 and on World Human Rights Day, the government announced new charges against scores of arbitrarily detained activists, including Ahmed Mansour, which could have seen them kept behind bars for years more. We call for an immediate end to Ahmed Mansour's isolation and for his immediate and unconditional release. At minimum, he should be granted a visit by international human rights observers. There can be no climate justice without human rights. Free them all!
Free them all! No climate justice without human rights! No climate justice without human rights!
This is the story of environmental human rights defender Juan Thi Minh Hong. A year ago, just before SB's 58, she and several colleagues were detained for questioning by the police division for economic crimes, while others were subsequently released and asked to return to the police station for further questioning. Hong was presented with a temporary detention order with charges for tax evasion. In September last year, she was sentenced to 3 years in prison. Following the arrest of other human rights defenders, Huang had closed her environmental organization Change MBN, saying that she feared that she would also be persecuted. The chilling effect of such cases brought under tax laws is palpable among civil society in our country and risks stifling debate on issues of importance to society as a whole. Arrests of environmental human rights defenders are taking place amid the government's stated commitments to a just and sustainable energy transition. To achieve this goal, human rights defenders and environmental organizations must be able to participate freely and actively in shaping climate and environmental policies and decision-making. One commitment is reflected in these few lines that she wrote shortly after closing the NGO she had founded. In climate action, it feels great to be able to do big things, like integrating climate change measures into national policies, or supporting frontline communities to become more resilient to climate impacts. But it also feels great to be able to do small things. Find something you want to change in your community